Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the zeros or the roots, or what is also called the x. Sorry about that. Which is also called the x-intercepts. Okay, they can be any of those three things. So that means if it's the x-intercept, we've already talked about in class that means that we have some number for the x, but we have a 0 every single time for the y value. Okay, so if I'm looking at the problems that are on 14 through 19, if you look at those, they're already set equal to 0. That means the y has already been replaced for the 0. We're going to find the solutions, or the zeros, or the roots, or the x-intercepts. It all means the same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to use what is called the zero property. What it means is I take what's in the first set of parentheses, I set it equal to 0. I take what's in the second set of parentheses, I set it equal to 0. Now, why can I do that? Well, the first factor, if it was 0 and it was multiplied by the second factor, we would get 0. If I had 0 on the second one, the second factor, and I multiply it by the first factor, we would again get 0. I'll show you what I mean. If I subtract 1 from both sides, I would get x equals negative 1. If I did it on this one, I get x equals negative 2. That means we have two choices in order to make this equation 0. Let's check our answers. So if I was to plug in, sorry about that, if I was to plug in negative 1, I would get negative 1 plus 1 times negative 1 plus 2. Would that equal 0? Well, this would be 0 times 1. Does that equal 0? Yes, it does. So that means anytime I was to plug in negative 1 for this problem, we would come out with 0. So that means my x-intercept, one of my x-intercepts on this one, would be x equals negative 1. Now, I look at x plus 2. I solved that. If I plug that back in, I would get negative 2 plus 1 times negative 2 plus 2. Does that equal 0? I would get negative 1 times 0. And amazingly, yes, that comes out. So negative 1 and negative 2 are both solutions to this problem. They are the zeros. They are where the parabola is going to hit the x-axis at negative 1 and at negative 2. So we're going to come over. I'll do one more with you. If we look at this one, we have, this is my first factor. This is my second factor. I take my first factor and I set it equal to 0. Take my second factor and I set it equal to 0. I add 2 to both sides and I get 3x equals 2. I divide both sides by the 3 and I get x equals 2/3. On this one, I subtract the 12 to the other side and I get x equals negative 2. So that means my two solutions for this problem are x equals 2/3 and negative 12. Those are my answers for this problem. Okay, I want you to go ahead and do 16 through 19. Now you should have already done yours and you should have already put the answers in. So let's go ahead and look at this. Oh, look at this one. We have the exact same thing. Do I really have to write it 2 times? Well, you can if you want, but I'm not going to. If I add 3 to both sides, I get x equals 3. So that means that when I was to draw this parabola, that means this point right here is where the parabola is going to hit. So that means, ignore my drawing, that was horrible. Let's try it again, see if I can get any better. Nope, that's still horrible, but you get the point. That is terrible. Let's try it for an umpteenth amount of times. Oh, much better, but still horrible. Anyway, so that's what your parabola would kind of sort of look like. It would hit the x-axis 1 time, where this one and this one would hit, oh, I forgot to write this, like this. Okay, this would hit it twice. This one, I'm already looking at it, I can tell. There are 3 factors, 1, 2, 3, that means we're going to have 3 answers. X equals -4, x equals 6, and x equals 10. On this one, this is a little weird, but that's okay. You take that first factor and set it equal to 0, and amazing, it is 0. X minus 6 equals 0, so x equals 6. So my 2 answers would be 0 and 6. Last but certainly not least, I would have x plus 4 equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0, and hopefully you came out with -4 and 5. That is how you do the zero product. Okay, now we're going to come down. No, we're not. We're going to go right here. We do need to talk about this a little bit. I want you to look at this. What do you notice about these two? What do you notice about these two? What do you notice about these two? Hopefully you notice that all 3 of them are basically the same factors except for one is positive and one is negative. If I multiply here, I would get x squared. If I multiplied here, I would get -x. If I multiplied here, I would get x, and here, -1. So when I put those together, I would get x squared minus 1. Let's look at the next one. Oopsie daisy. Look at these two. Exactly the same. So if I multiplied these two, I would get x squared. These two, -9x. Here I would get 9x. And last but not least, -81. So when I combine like terms, don't want to do the same color, I would get x squared minus 81. What are you noticing? So I want you to go ahead and do the next 4. You should have gotten this. On this next one, you should have gotten this. On this one, you should get x squared minus 4. Oopsie daisy. And on this next one, x squared minus 9. If you notice, on every time you did it, you would have a squared for the first term, a squared for the second term, and you'd have a minus in between. The middle terms always cancel each other out when these problems are like this. So the rule for this is if you have the first one squared, the last one squared, and you have a minus sign in between. Good. Now, let's look at this. You've done this over and over again. I apologize. This is on page 531 of your book. We've done this repeatedly. Now, I think some of your classes didn't learn finding the x-intercepts like my class did, but that's okay. I'm going to show you. If it's the x-intercept, again, that means that we have some number for the x value and a 0 for the y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vertex form and I'm going to set it equal to 0. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get 8 on the other side. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides of the equal sign. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by the 2. When I do that, I should get this. Now, last year you should have learned how to do square roots. We did square roots earlier, so if I take the square root of this side and I take the square root of this side, you should be getting a positive 2, and instead of rewrite it, we just write it with a negative underneath. This plus minus means you have a positive number and you have a negative number, equals x plus 1. So if you need to, you can split it into 2 different equations. You can have it as x plus 1 equals 2, and you would get x equals 1. And then you could also have the equation of x plus 1 equals negative 2. So x would equal negative 3. So that means that x equals 1 and negative 3. Now, if you know me very well, you know that I don't like when they write it like that. But for this, we're going to be okay. So x is 1. So I'm going to put that dot right there. And x is negative 3. So I'm going to put that dot right there. Okay, so on here, what's easy to find? Well, we can find the x-intercepts just like I did, but that's not the easy thing to find. And I can't even spell today, but that's okay. You'll forgive me. Intercept. There we go. Okay, the easiest thing to find on this one is actually the vertex point. The vertex point, this is my h, this is my k. So my vertex point is negative 1, negative 8. So then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to plot negative 1, negative 8. So negative 1, negative 8 is right here. Then, oh, we don't have standard form yet, but we need to find that. So that means that I need to multiply out the x plus 1 and x plus 1. So I would have y equals, okay, for some reason it's not working correctly. There we go. 2 times x plus 1. And remember, you can rewrite it like this so that it makes it easier, but don't forget your minus 8 here. So when you multiply these two together, when you do this, you should get x squared plus 2x plus 1 minus 8. I multiply my 2 through, and I would get 2x squared plus 4x plus 2 minus 8. So that means my standard form is 2x squared. Oops, there we go, minus 6. So if I have it in my standard form, what's easy to find? The y-intercept. So my y-intercept, try that again. Oh, I did it right the first time. There we go. So now I can come over here to 0, -6. And I plug in 0, -6. And remember, we have an axis of symmetry. This is my axis of symmetry right here. And so right here, now, do I have 5 points? I sure do. Even though I'm not finished with the problem yet, oh, guess what? I can sort of kind of draw. Ooh, that didn't even go through. My parabola. Sorry about that. That should go through right there. Okay, the last but not least, look, down here, we could just set this equal to 0 and find the zeros like we did up above. So x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0. So x equals 1, x equals -3. So on this one, what's easy to find are your x-intercepts. Oh, that's horrible handwriting. I know. Voila. Now, there is a Desmos activity that we will put in so that you guys can practice this. If you have any questions, please leave us a message.